Jake was the kind of guy who liked being alone, not because he didn't like people, but because his work needed complete silence. He lived in a small wooden house way up in the mountains, where the nearest neighbor was miles away. Perfect for someone who spent his days mixing chemicals and creating new formulas. For the past 2 years, Jake had been working on something special. He called it his energy drink, but it wasn't like the stuff you buy at stores. This was made from rare plants that only grew high up in these mountains. Herbs that local people said had magical powers, though Jake preferred to think of it as science. Every morning he would wake up, make his coffee, and head straight to his little lab in the basement. The room was filled with glass bottles, small, machines that beeped softly, and notebooks full of his messy handwriting. Jake was convinced his special formula would change everything. Just one small bottle could give someone energy for days. That Tuesday night started like any other. Rain was hitting his windows hard, and thunder was shaking the whole house. Jake was downstairs, carefully measuring drops of his latest batch into a tiny glass. The liquid was bright green and smelled like fresh pine trees mixed with something sweet. He had just finished writing notes about the formula when the strangest thing happened. The whole house lit up like someone had turned on a giant flashlight outside. But this wasn't lightning. The light was blue and silver, and it lasted for almost 10 seconds. Then came the loudest crash Jake had ever heard. His first thought was that a tree had fallen on his roof. Living in the mountains, that happened sometimes during bad storms, but when he looked up at the ceiling, everything seemed fine. The crash had come from his backyard. Jake grabbed his flashlight and rain jacket. He wasn't the bravest guy in the world, but curiosity always got the better of him. As he stepped outside, the rain immediately soaked through his jacket. The storm was getting worse, but he could see something glowing softly behind his house. What he found made him question everything he thought he knew about the world. There, in the middle of his vegetable garden, was something that definitely didn't belong on Earth. It looked like a small car, but made of some kind of shiny metal that seemed to glow from the inside. The shape was all wrong too, smooth and curved like an egg, with no wheels or doors that he could see. Steam was rising from the strange object, and Jake could hear soft crackling sounds, like when you throw water on a hot pan. Part of the thing was buried in the mud, and his poor tomato plants were completely destroyed. As he got closer, Jake noticed that one side of the object had a crack running down it. Through the crack, he could see a soft, purple light pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat. That's when he realized this wasn't just some weird machine. Someone or something was inside. Jake's hands were shaking as he walked around the object looking for some way to open it. The surface was warm to the touch, even in the cold rain. Finally, he found what looked like a handle, though it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. When he touched it, the crack widened with a soft hissing sound. What he saw inside made him take 3 steps backward. Lying in what looked like a comfortable chair was a person. At least Jake thought it was a person. She had the same basic shape. As a human, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with hair, but her skin was the color of moonlight, pale blue and almost glowing. Her hair was silver like starlight, and even unconscious she seemed to shimmer. She was wearing clothes that looked like they were made of liquid metal, and she was breathing, though very slowly. Jake could see a small cut on her forehead with something that looked like blood, except it was silver instead of red. For a moment, Jake just stood there in the rain, staring. His scientist brain was trying to process what he was seeing, while another part of his mind was screaming that this was impossible. People didn't fall from the sky. People didn't have blue skin and silver hair. But here she was, clearly hurt and unconscious in his backyard. Jake made a decision that would change his life forever. He couldn't just leave her outside in the storm. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she needed help. Getting her out of the strange vehicle wasn't easy. She was lighter than a normal person, but Jake was worried about hurting her more. Finally, he managed to lift her carefully and carry her toward his house. Her skin felt cool and smooth, and up close he could see that she was breathing in a rhythm that seemed just slightly off from what felt normal. Inside, Jake cleared off his couch and made her as comfortable as possible. He found his first aid kit and gently cleaned the cut on her forehead. The silver liquid stopped flowing pretty quickly, which was a good sign. He covered her with his warmest blanket and turned up the heat. Then Jake sat in his chair and stared at her, wondering what on earth he was supposed to do next. The storm knocked out his power around midnight, which meant no phone, no internet, and no way to contact anyone even if he wanted to, which he wasn't sure he did. Something told him that calling the authorities about a blue-skinned woman who fell from the sky might not go well for either of them. So Jake spent the night watching over his unexpected guest, checking her breathing, and trying to figure out if this was all some crazy dream. Every time he dozed off in his chair, he would wake up and look at her, expecting her to be gone. But she was always still there, real as anything, sleeping peacefully on his couch. As morning came, and the storm finally passed, Jake realized his quiet life in the mountains had just become very complicated. Jake woke up on his chair with a terrible pain in his neck. Sleeping sitting up was never a good idea, but he hadn't wanted to leave his strange guest alone. The morning sun was streaming through his windows, and for a second, he almost forgot about everything that happened the night before. Then he looked at his couch and remembered. She was still there, still breathing that slightly odd rhythm, still glowing faintly in the morning light. Her silver hair caught the sunlight like spun metal, and Jake had to admit she was probably the most beautiful person he'd ever seen, even if she wasn't exactly a person. After making himself some coffee and toast, Jake checked on her again. Her breathing seemed stronger, and the cut on her forehead was healing much faster than it should have. The silver blood had dried into what looked like tiny crystals that sparkled when the light hit them just right. Jake spent the morning trying to fix his power and phone lines, but the storm had done more damage than he thought. His generator was working, so he had electricity in the house, but there was no way to contact the outside world. Maybe that was for the best right now. Around noon, Jake realized he was running low on basic supplies. He needed more first aid stuff, some better food, and maybe some clothes that might fit his guest when she woke up. The nearest town was an hour drive down the mountain, but he figured she would be safe sleeping while he was gone. Before leaving, Jake left a note on the coffee table just in case she woke up while he was away. He wrote it in simple words and drew some pictures too, hoping she might understand. The note basically said he would be back soon and that she was safe. What Jake didn't expect was how curious his guest would be when she finally opened her eyes. She woke up about 20 minutes after Jake's truck disappeared down the mountain road. At first, she just lay there trying to remember what had happened. Her head felt fuzzy and everything around her looked strange and unfamiliar. Slowly, she sat up and looked around Jake's living room. The furniture was so different from what she was used to. Everything was made of wood and fabric, warm colors and soft textures. Her people made everything from metals and crystals, cold and precise. This place felt cozy. She tried to stand up and immediately felt dizzy. Her body felt weak and heavy, like she was moving through thick water. This wasn't normal for her kind. They were usually strong and quick, but something was wrong with her energy levels. That's when she noticed she was incredibly thirsty. Her people didn't need water as often as humans, but when they did need it, the thirst was overwhelming. She got up slowly and started looking around the house for something to drink. The kitchen was obviously where food was prepared, so she headed there first. Jake's kitchen was simple but clean. There were strange machines everywhere that she didn't recognize, but she could see glasses and what looked like a place where water might come from. She tried turning the handles on the sink, and after a few tries, clear liquid came out. But when she cupped her hands and tasted it, something felt wrong. The liquid was too simple, too empty. Her body was craving something more, something with energy and life in it. That's when she noticed the door leading downstairs. Curious and still desperately thirsty, she made her way down to Jake's laboratory. The basement was full of amazing things she'd never seen before. Glass containers filled with colorful liquids, machines that hummed softly, and tables covered with what looked like research notes. But what caught her attention immediately was a small glass bottle sitting on the main work table. Inside was a bright green liquid that seemed to glow with its own light. Even from across the room, she could sense that this liquid was alive with energy. She walked over to the bottle and picked it up. The glass was warm in her hands and the liquid inside swirled gently, like it was happy to be moving. Without really thinking about it, she unscrewed the top and took a small sip. The effect was immediate and incredible. It was like someone had just plugged her into a power source. Energy flowed through her body like electricity, making her feel more alive than she had since her ship crashed. Her weakness disappeared, her dizziness faded, and for the first time since waking up, she felt like herself again. So she drank the rest of the bottle. What happened next was something Jake would never forget, even if he lived to be 100 years old. When Jake got back from town 3 hours later, he could hear noise coming from inside his house before he even got to the front door. It sounded like someone was rearranging all his furniture at super speed. He opened the door carefully, not sure what to expect, and found his living room had been completely cleaned and reorganized. The couch was in a different spot, his books were arranged by color, and everything was spotless. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was watching his guest move around his kitchen like she was dancing in fast forward. She was putting dishes away, wiping counters, and organizing his cabinets. But she was moving so fast that Jake could barely follow her movements. And she was glowing brighter than before, like she had her own personal spotlight. When she noticed Jake standing in the doorway, she rushed over to him with a huge smile on her face. She started talking rapidly in a language that sounded like music mixed with wind chimes. Her voice was excited and grateful, and even though Jake couldn't understand the words, he could tell she was trying to thank him. But then she did something that made Jake's eyes go wide. She picked up his heavy wooden dining table with one hand and moved it to show him how clean she'd made the floor underneath. Jake's dining table weighed at least 100 pounds, and she was handling it like it was made of paper. That's when Jake noticed the empty bottle on his kitchen counter, the same bottle that had contained his most concentrated batch of energy formula. The bottle that was supposed to last him weeks of testing. His guest followed his gaze to the empty bottle, and her expression changed to one of worry. She picked up the bottle and pointed to it, then pointed to herself, then made a gesture that clearly meant, "More, please." Jake realized two things at that moment. First, his energy formula worked way better on alien biology than he had ever imagined. And second, his new houseguest was going to want a lot more of his special green liquid. As if to prove his point, she grabbed his arm gently and led him toward the basement, pointing excitedly at his laboratory, while repeating what sounded like the same word over and over again in her musical language. Jake had a feeling his quiet life was about to get much more complicated. The next morning, Jake woke up to find his alien guest sitting on his kitchen floor staring at the empty bottle. She'd been holding it all night, turning it over and over in her hands like it was the most precious thing in the world. When she saw Jake come downstairs, she immediately jumped up and ran to him. Her movements were slower now, not like the super speed she had yesterday. The bright glow around her had faded to just a soft shimmer, and Jake could see she was getting weaker, again. She held up the empty bottle and pointed to it, then pointed to herself. Her eyes were wide and pleading, and she kept repeating the same word in her musical language. Even without understanding her words, Jake knew exactly what she was asking for. More of his special green formula. Jake tried to explain to her through gestures that he needed time to make more. He showed her his notebook, pointed to his equipment, and tried to act out the process of mixing and cooking the ingredients. But she didn't seem to understand, or maybe she just didn't want to wait. She followed him everywhere. When Jake went to the bathroom, she waited right outside the door. When he tried to work in his lab, she stood behind him, watching every move he made. When he sat down to eat breakfast, she sat across from him, still holding that empty bottle, and looking at him with those hopeful, desperate eyes. By the third day, things were getting really concerning. Jake had started making a new batch of his formula, but the process took time. Some of the ingredients needed to be mixed slowly. Others had to sit for hours before they were ready. His guest was getting weaker by the hour. She had learned to say a few words in English by listening to Jake talk. The first word she learned was please. She would point to his lab, then to herself, and say please over and over again. Sometimes she would grab his hand and try to pull him toward the basement, repeating, "Please, please, please," in her musical voice. Jake felt terrible watching her suffer, but he was also scared. He had no idea what his formula was doing to her alien body. What if giving her more made things worse? What if she was getting addicted to it? What if it was actually hurting her? But then again, what if she needed it to survive? On the fourth day, Jake made a discovery that changed everything. He was looking through his old research notes, trying to understand why his formula affected her so strongly, when he found something interesting. The plants he used in his formula were very similar to plants that grew on other planets, according to some old astronomy articles he had read. That's when his guest did something that amazed him. She had been watching him read, and suddenly she got very excited. She ran to his bookshelf and started pulling down books about space and planets. She couldn't read English, but she recognized the pictures. She found a book about different types of stars and planets, and she started pointing to specific pictures. One picture showed a solar system with planets that had rings around them. She kept pointing to one planet and then pointing to herself, saying something in her language that sounded like home. Then she found another book about plants and minerals from around the world. She flipped through it quickly until she found pictures of plants that looked similar to the ones Jake used in his formula. She got so excited that she started glowing brighter again, just from her emotions. Jake began to understand. The plants he was using weren't just similar to plants from her world. They might be exactly what her people needed to survive. Maybe her ship hadn't crashed randomly. Maybe she had been looking for these specific plants. But understanding didn't make the situation any easier. Jake was running out of the rare mountain herbs. He only had enough to make one more batch of his formula, maybe two if he was careful. And his guest was getting weaker every day. She had started drawing pictures to communicate with him. Simple, drawings of herself looking sad and tired, then drawings of herself drinking the green liquid and becoming happy and strong again. She drew pictures of Jake making the formula, and she drew hearts around these pictures to show how grateful she was. The drawings broke Jake's heart. Here was someone from another world stranded and suffering, and the only thing that could help her was something he might not be able to make much more of. On the fifth day, Jake woke up to find his guest collapsed on the kitchen floor. She was still breathing, but barely. Her skin had lost most of its glow and she felt cold to the touch. Jake carried her to the couch and covered her with blankets, but she was shivering like she was freezing, even though the house was warm. That's when Jake made his decision. He still had enough ingredients for one more batch of his formula. It would take him all day to make it properly, but he couldn't watch her suffer anymore. He spent the entire day in his lab carefully measuring and mixing. Every few minutes he would run upstairs to check on her. She was getting weaker, but she was still hanging on. While the formula was cooking, Jake sat beside her and held her hand. Her skin was still that beautiful pale blue color, but it was fading. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and even though she couldn't speak much English, he could see the gratitude in her expression. "Please," she whispered. The word coming out so softly Jake almost didn't hear it. "I'm making more," Jake told her, even though he wasn't sure she understood. "Just hold on a little longer." As the sun was setting, Jake's formula was finally ready. It was the best batch he had ever made, bright green and glowing with energy. He helped his guest sit up and gave her a small sip first, just to be safe. The change was immediate and incredible. Color returned to her skin, her eyes brightened, and she sat up straighter. Jake gave her a little more, and she smiled for the first time in days. But as Jake watched her recovery, he realized something that scared him. This was his last batch. After this, he would have no more of the rare ingredients. And looking at how much his guest needed the formula just to survive, Jake knew they had a serious problem. His guest was completely dependent on his formula, and he was almost out of ways to make more. As she recovered her strength and started glowing softly again, Jake wondered what they were going to do next. He had saved her life, but maybe only temporarily. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he started to worry about what would happen when other people found out about her. because sooner or later someone was going to come looking for the strange lights and crashes that had been happening on his mountain. And Jake wasn't sure he could protect her forever. 2 weeks had passed since Jake's guest had recovered from her collapse, and their daily routine had become strangely normal. Every morning, she would help him in the kitchen, moving with that graceful speed that still amazed him. Every afternoon, she would sit with him while he worked on making small amounts of his formula, stretching his remaining ingredients as far as possible. But Jake could see the worry in her eyes. She knew he was running out of supplies, and she knew what that meant for both of them. That's when everything changed. Jake woke up one morning to find his guest sitting at his kitchen table with a pile of papers in front of her. She had somehow gotten into his locked desk drawer and pulled out all his old research notes, the ones he had written in college about space travel and energy sources. She looked up at him with excitement in her glowing eyes and pointed to a specific page. It was a research paper Jake had written about theoretical fuel sources for spacecraft. At the time, he thought he was just imagining cool science fiction ideas. Now, looking at the paper through her eyes, he realized he might have been describing something real. She stood up and walked to his bookshelf, pulling out the astronomy books they had looked at before. But this time, she wasn't just pointing at pictures of her home planet. She was trying to tell him a story. Using the pictures in the books and her limited English words, she began to explain what had really happened to her people. She pointed to her home planet, then made a gesture that looked like something dying or fading away. She showed him pictures of stars and made a sad face, then pointed to herself and made a gesture that meant searching. Jake was starting to understand, but he needed to know more. He grabbed a notebook and started drawing simple pictures while asking her questions. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth came out. Her people lived on a world far from Earth, orbiting a star that was much older than our sun. For thousands of years, they had used the natural energy from their star to power their entire civilization. But their star was dying, getting weaker every year, and her people were running out of power. She drew pictures of cities going dark, of people getting sick and weak, of ships that couldn't fly anymore. Her people were desperate, sending scouts across the galaxy to find new energy sources before their world completely died. That's when Jake understood why his formula affected her so powerfully. The plants he used grew in soil that had been touched by cosmic radiation from space. Over thousands of years, they had absorbed the same type of energy that her people needed to survive. His formula wasn't just giving her energy, it was giving her life itself. But the most shocking part was still coming. His guest pulled out one more book, this one about Earth's geology and mineral deposits. She pointed to a map of Jake's mountain region and got very excited. She kept pointing to specific areas on the map, then to his formula ingredients, then back to the map. Jake realized she was trying to tell him that his mountain wasn't just a random place where these plants grew. The whole area was sitting on top of a massive deposit of the exact minerals and elements her people needed. His little mountain cabin was basically sitting on top of an alien gold mine. That's when Jake heard the helicopters. At first, it was just a distant sound, like thunder that wouldn't stop. But as the noise got closer, Jake realized it wasn't thunder at all. He looked out his window and saw 3 black helicopters circling his property. His guest heard the noise too, and her reaction was immediate and terrifying. She grabbed Jake's arm and started speaking rapidly in her language, her voice full of panic. She pointed to the helicopters, then to herself, then made a gesture across her throat that needed no translation. Jake understood. If the government found her, things would not go well. The helicopters landed in Jake's backyard, right next to where her ship had crashed 2 weeks ago. Men in dark suits jumped out, along with people carrying strange electronic equipment. Jake could see them through his window, examining the crash site and taking pictures of everything. His guest was terrified, but she was also trying to tell him something important. She grabbed his notebook and started drawing frantically. She drew pictures of more ships, lots of them, coming toward Earth. She drew pictures of her people, but also of other alien races that didn't look friendly. Jake began to understand the bigger picture. His guest wasn't the only one looking for these energy sources. Other alien civilizations were searching too, and some of them might not be as peaceful as her people. If word got out about the energy deposits under his mountain, Earth could become a battleground. Someone was knocking on his front door. Heavy, official knocking that meant business. Jake looked at his guest, and she looked back at him. In that moment, they both realized that everything was about to change. The quiet life on the mountain was over, and whatever happened next would affect not just them, but possibly both of their worlds. She reached over and grabbed the last bottle of Jake's formula from the table. She held it up and said one of the few English phrases she had learned perfectly. "Help my people." Then she did something that surprised Jake completely. She opened the bottle and drank only half of it, leaving the rest for later. For the first time since he'd known her, she was rationing the formula instead of drinking it all at once. The knocking on the door got louder and more demanding. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of hiding his guest or pretending she didn't exist, he was going to tell the truth. But he wasn't going to let them treat her like some kind of laboratory experiment. He walked to the front door with his guest right behind him. She was scared, but she was also ready to face whatever came next. As Jake reached for the door handle, she put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Thank you, Jake." It was the first time she had said his name, and hearing it in her musical voice made him realize how much he cared about what happened to her. Jake opened the door to find 5 people in dark suits and military uniforms standing on his porch. The man in front was tall and serious-looking, with the kind of face that had seen too many secrets. "Good morning," the man said. "We're here about the unusual energy readings coming from your property. We need to talk." Jake looked back at his guest, who was standing in his living room, glowing softly and looking more beautiful and alien than ever. Then he looked back at the government agents. "Yes," Jake said. "I think we do need to talk." The government agents stood in Jake's living room like they owned the place. The tall man who seemed to be in charge introduced himself as Agent Wilson, and he kept staring at Jake's guest like she was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "We've been tracking unusual energy signatures from this location for 2 weeks, Agent Wilson said, pulling out a tablet that showed strange, colorful readings. "We know something crashed here, and we know it wasn't from Earth." Jake's guest stayed close to him, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She looked directly at the agents with those glowing eyes and said clearly, "I am Luna." It was the name Jake had given her, and hearing her use it made his heart skip a beat. Agent Wilson raised an eyebrow. "You speak English?" "Little bit," Luna replied, her musical accent making even those simple words sound beautiful. "Jake, teach me." What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of being scared or defensive, Luna walked over to Jake's research table and picked up his notebook. She started drawing again, but this time she was drawing for the government agents. She drew her dying world, her desperate people, and the energy crisis that was killing her civilization. She drew other alien races, some peaceful and some definitely not, all searching for the same energy sources. Then she drew Earth, with Jake's mountain glowing like a beacon. "Many ships coming," Luna said, pointing to her drawings. "Some good people like me, some bad people. Very bad." Agent Wilson looked at the drawings, then at Jake, then back at Luna. "How many ships are we talking about?" Luna held up her hands and started counting on her fingers. When she ran out of fingers, she started over, and over again. Jake felt his stomach drop. "She's saying dozens of ships, maybe hundreds." Agent Wilson's serious expression got even more serious. He stepped aside and spoke quietly into a radio device, using words Jake couldn't quite hear. But whatever he was saying, it was making the other agents look worried. That's when Luna did something incredible. She walked over to her crashed ship, which the agents had dragged into Jake's yard, and placed her hands on its damaged surface. The ship responded to her touch, glowing brighter and making soft humming sounds. "I can call my people," Luna said. "Tell them I found what we need, but I need more of Jake's medicine to make ship work." Jake looked at the half-empty bottle of his formula, then at Luna, then at the government agents. Everyone was staring at him, waiting for him to make a decision that could affect the entire world. If I give you the rest of my formula, Jake said slowly, what happens to your people, and what happens to Earth? Luna thought for a moment, choosing her English words carefully. My people are good. We trade, we share, we help. We give Earth people new science, new medicine, new ways to make energy. Earth people give us what we need to save our world. Agent Wilson crossed his arms. And the bad aliens you mentioned? Luna's expression darkened. They take. They not ask. They make war. Jake realized what she was saying. If Luna's peaceful people got to Earth first, they could form an alliance and help protect the planet from the hostile aliens who would eventually show up anyway. But if the bad aliens arrive first, show me how to make more of the formula, Jake said suddenly. Everyone stared at him. Agent Wilson looked confused, Luna looked hopeful, and the other agents just looked lost. Jake explained his idea. Instead of just giving Luna the rest of his formula, he would teach her people how to make it themselves using Earth's resources. In return, her people would share their advanced technology and help protect Earth from the hostile alien races. But here's the important part, Jake continued. We do this together. Your people don't just take what they need and leave. They stay and help us build a better world for everyone. Luna's eyes lit up like stars. She understood exactly what Jake was proposing. A real partnership between Earth and her people, not just a desperate trade deal. Agent Wilson looked skeptical. How do we know we can trust them? That's when Luna made a gesture that touched everyone in the room. She took the half-empty bottle of Jake's formula and poured a small amount into her hands. Then she walked over to Agent Wilson and offered it to him. You try, she said simply. See how it makes you feel. Then you know it is good. Agent Wilson looked at Jake, who nodded. The agent took a tiny sip of the formula, and within seconds his eyes went wide. Jake could see the energy flowing through him, making him stand straighter and look more alert than before. This is incredible, Agent Wilson whispered. I feel like I could run a marathon. Luna smiled. Now imagine what it can do for sick people, for old people, for people who are tired and hurt. My people know how to make this medicine even better. Over the next few hours, Luna worked with Jake to repair her ship's communication system. She used the remaining formula to power the repairs, and slowly the ship came back to life. Lights flickered on, strange sounds filled the air, and panels that had been dark began glowing with soft colors. When the communication system finally worked, Luna spoke into it in her musical language. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the emotion in her voice. Relief, hope, and excitement all mixed together. 3 days later, Jake's mountain became the most important place on Earth. Luna's people arrived in ships that looked like floating crystals, beautiful and peaceful. They brought gifts of advanced technology, medicines that could cure diseases Earth doctors had never solved, and energy systems that were completely clean and safe. Jake found himself at the center of the most important moment in human history. He was the bridge between two worlds, the person who helped create the first real friendship between Earth and an alien civilization. The best part was that Luna stayed on Earth as an ambassador for her people. She moved in permanently to Jake's mountain cabin, helping him expand his laboratory into a research center where humans and aliens worked together. Jake's simple energy formula had become the foundation for a new age of cooperation between worlds. And every morning, he still made Luna her daily dose of the special green liquid, though now they had enough ingredients to last forever. Looking back, Jake realized that the day Luna crashed into his backyard was the luckiest day of his life. He had gone from being a lonely scientist to being the person who helped save two worlds, and Luna never had to beg for his formula again, because now they were partners in the greatest adventure anyone could imagine.